Here we go with a mudroom rant. We're going to call this Obama Circumvents Congress. And this is presidential documents from the Federal Register. Executive Order 13563 of January 18th, 2011. Improving Regulation and Regulatory Review. By the authority vested in me as President by the Constitution and the laws of the United States of America, and in order to improve regulation and regulatory review, it is hereby ordered as follows. Section 1. General Principles of Regulation. A. Our regulatory system must protect public health, welfare, safety, and our environment while promoting economic growth, innovation, competitiveness, and job creation. It must be based on the best available science. It must allow for public participation and an open exchange of ideas. It must promote predictability and reduce uncertainty. It must identify and use the best, most innovative, and least burdensome tools for achieving regulatory ends. It must take into account benefits and costs, both quantitative and qualitative. It must ensure that regulations are accessible, consistent, written in plain language, and easy to understand. It must measure and seek to improve the actual results of regulatory requirements. B. This order is supplemental to and reaffirms the principles, structures, and definitions governing contemporary regulatory review that were established in Executive Order 12866 of September 30th, 1993. As stated in that executive order, and to the extent permitted by law, each agency must, among other things, 1. Propose or adopt a regulation only upon a reasoned determination that its benefits justify its costs, recognizing that some benefits and costs are difficult to quantify. 2. Tailor its regulations to impose the least burden on society, consistent with obtaining regulatory objectives, taking into account, among other things, and to the extent practicable, the costs of cumulative regulations. 3. Select, in choosing among alternative regulatory approaches, those approaches that maximize net benefits, including potential economic, environmental, public, health, and safety, and other advantages, distributive impacts, and equity. 4. To the extent feasible, specify performance objectives rather than specifying the behavior or manner of compliance that regulated entities must adopt. And 5. Identify and assess available alternatives to direct regulation, including providing economic incentives to encourage the desired behavior, such as user fees or marketable permits, or providing information upon which choices can be made by the public. C. In applying these principles, each agency is directed to use the best available techniques to quantify anticipated present and future benefits and costs as accurately as possible. Where appropriate and permitted by law, each agency may consider and discuss qualitatively values that are difficult or impossible to quantify, including equity, human dignity, fairness, and distributive impacts. Section 2. Public participation. A. Regulations shall be adopted through a process that involves public participation. To that end, regulations shall be based, to the extent feasible and consistent with law, on the open exchange of information and perspectives among state, local, and tribal officials, experts in relevant disciplines, affected stakeholders, and in the private sector, and the public as a whole. B. To promote that open exchange, each agency, consistent with Executive Order 12866 and other applicable legal requirements, shall endeavor to provide the public with an opportunity to participate in the regulatory process To the extent feasible and permitted by law, each agency shall afford the public a meaningful opportunity to comment through the internet on any proposed regulation, with a comment period that should generally be at least 60 days. To the extent feasible and permitted by law, each agency shall also provide for both proposed and final rules timely online access to the rulemaking document on regulations.gov, including relevant scientific and technical findings in an open format that can be easily searched and downloaded. For proposed rules, such access shall include, to the extent feasible and permitted by law, an opportunity for public comment on all pertinent parts of the rulemaking docket, including relevant scientific and technical findings. C. Before issuing a notice of proposed rulemaking, each agency, where feasible and appropriate, shall seek the views of those who are likely to be affected, including those who are likely to benefit from and those who are potentially subject to such rulemaking. Section 3. Integration and innovation. Some sectors and industries face a significant number of regulatory requirements, some of which may be redundant, inconsistent, or overlapping. Greater coordination across agencies could reduce these requirements, thus reducing costs and simplifying and harmonizing rules. In developing regulatory actions and identifying appropriate approaches, each agency shall attempt to promote such coordination, simplification, and harmonization. Each agency shall also seek to identify, as appropriate, means to achieve regulatory goals that are designed to promote innovation. Flexible approaches, Section 4. Where relevant, feasible, and consistent with regulatory objectives, and to the extent permitted by law, each agency shall identify and consider regulatory approaches that reduce burdens and maintain flexibility and freedom of choice for the public. These approaches include warnings, appropriate default rules, and disclosure requirements, as well as provision of information to the public in a form that is clear and intelligible. Section 5. Science. Consistent with the President's memorandum for the heads of executive departments and agencies, Scientific Integrity, March 9, 2009, and its implementing guidance, each agency shall ensure the objectivity of any scientific and technological information and processes used to support the agency's regulatory actions. Section 6. Retrospective analysis of existing rules. A. To facilitate the periodic review of existing significant regulations, agencies shall consider how best to promote retrospective analysis of rules that may be outmoded, ineffective, insufficient, or excessively burdensome, and to modify, streamline, expand, or repeal them in accordance with what has been learned. Such retrospective analysis, including supporting data, should be released online whenever possible. B. Within 120 days of the date of this order, each agency shall develop and submit to the Office of Information and Regulatory Affairs a preliminary plan consistent with law and its resources and regulatory priorities, under which the agency will periodically review its existing significant regulations to determine whether any such regulation should be modified, streamlined, expanded, or repealed so as to make the agency's regulatory program more effective or less burdensome in achieving the regulatory objectives. Section 7. General provisions. A. For purposes of this order, agency shall have the meaning set forth in Section 3B of Executive Order 12866. B. Nothing in this order shall be construed to impair or otherwise affect 1. Authority granted by law to a department or agency, or the head thereof. 2. Functions of the Director of Office Management and budget relating to budgetary, administrative, or legislative proposals. C. This order shall be implemented consistent with applicable law and subject to the availability of appropriations. And D, this order is not intended to and does not create any right or benefit, substantive or procedural, enforceable at law or in equity by any party against the United States, its departments, agencies, or entities, its officers, employees, or agents, or any other person. First off, that's Congress's job. Secondly, nowhere in Article 2, Section 1 of the Constitution do I see anything that gives the president the right to make these executive orders. If somebody can show me where it is, please do. I do not see it in the Constitution. This is bullshit. Peace all.